Okay. So I'm very happy to introduce to everyone here today, Rosemary Viswanath. I hope I've pronounced it right, probably haven't, and Gunjan Zutshi, who will be talking to us today. And let me tell you a bit about them and about what they do. So first of all, they work in a field called group relations, and in particular in group relations India. And Group Relations India is committed to making the potential of group relations methodology available to a wide section of Indian society. I was lucky enough to catch them on a webinar done by the International TA Association. Loved it so much, saw links to TA and thought, oh, I would like them to bring group relations to us as well and share it with us. GRI uses systems, psychodynamic, and socio-analysis approaches, paying particular attention to unconscious processes. Gunjan Zutshi is a certified transactional analyst in psychotherapy with a private practice in Bangalore. She's a coach and an OD practitioner with over 27 years of experience. She is an associate member of GRI and has been involved in GR work for over a decade. She is also a certified member of the South Asian Association for Transactional Analysts and the International TA Association, and an ardent yoga practitioner for over 20 years, 15 years, sorry. And then Rosemary Viswanath is an independent organizational consultant, and she is the founder of Group Relations India. She works with business, government, and in not-for-profit sectors, and consults to organizations and systems that strive to impact society in significant and meaningful ways, particularly in those who work on human rights development and its impacts, social justice, equity, women's rights and empowerment, alternative structures and visions of society, democracy, and governance. Rose has been intensively involved in group relations conferences based on the work and frameworks developed at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in the UK. And in this arena, she has been in directorship as well as consulting staff roles in over 45 conferences in India, France, the UK, Netherlands, Australia, and Israel since the 1990s. So we are very grateful to have both of you presenting to us and Sitar today, and look so forward to the next hour and a half with you. Welcome.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you very, very much. We're very glad to see each of you here. And I was thinking, since we do have a generous amount of time, would any of you like to talk about what drew you to join this webinar? What are you looking for? And I hope we're going to be able to at least meet some of your expectations, but it would be good to know. So if you feel like, would you just like to tell us maybe a line about yourselves and, you know, what about this topic seemed interesting to you? What drew you here? Sure.
Hi, I'm happy to share. I'm curious actually about groups and group dynamics. I've always noticed that I am not comfortable in groups. And only when I studied TA and did therapy and supervision and more work that I really understood the background that led to me feeling this discomfort. So as a result, I'm better in groups, but still, I think that there are things that I feel maybe perhaps I haven't uncovered. So I'm always curious about anything to do with groups to see what comes up for me.
Thank you, Rabia. Sure, Cecil, go ahead.
Thank you. So I was forwarded the email by a friend who is a psychologist, and I am not, but I am a team coach. And our team coach approach is ORSC, or Organizational Relationship Systems Coaching. And we work with a lot of teams who are in some degree of distress, relational distress. And what drew me particularly was groups and systems also have unconscious processes or dynamics of their own. And one of the things we try and do to surface those and reveal those and check in with the systems, share what we're noticing. But I feel, the awareness of the unconscious processes hasn't been such an explicit part of our training. And so I'm really keen to know more.
Thanks, Cecil. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to say something? It isn't compulsory, but if you would like to. Sure, Kirsty.
I've been working more and more with groups, so I'm just interested to see what I can learn about that that's going to support that process. I also just need to name that I might need to dip in and out because I'm juggling being here with a toddler at home who's very busy, and some other stuff that's going on. So I'm going to try be as present as I can because I really want to learn as much as I can, but just to name, I might need to do that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan? You're muted, Dan. You're muted.
My apologies. There we go. Glad to be able to hear you because I had to miss the one that you did for ITAA. And I'm a psychotherapist, TA psychotherapist of many years. And I've had experience of the Tavistock methods in the past to some degree. Not always, I must say, with pleasing results. And so I'm looking for a little bit of redemption of the Tavistock and its ideas, if that doesn't put you too much on the spot. Perhaps some more modern updating of it.
We'll see. Thank you. And thank you for your openness. Appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. If there isn't anything particular that others want to say, then maybe we will proceed. We have a presentation, a formal one, a PowerPoint presentation, which we will be glad to share with you, so you don't need to take the notes and stuff like that. But what we thought is that at 3 points in the presentation, we would take a pause and invite, any responses or questions or clarifications. And then at the end, given Margaret, a total of 1.5 hours or a total of 2 hours? What is our time? We are forever confused.
2 hours. Forever confused. It's 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So we'll take the time that all of us are interested in staying together for this at the end, if there are any further discussions, and we hope that it would be interactive. And so that's how we'll work. So I'd be pausing. I would begin, and then Gunjan will join in later. But when it comes to the questions or the clarifications, either of us, as it emerges, we will be happy to respond and top up maybe each other's responses also if needed. Our aim today is to offer you what is in the framework of group relations. We know that we are speaking to people who are either primarily or to a large extent, people who are TA practitioners. And we aren't going to try to see, how this aligns or not. It does perhaps in some ways, and we would be very glad to make those discoveries as to, what sense it makes to you, or more than that, to see whether you recognize some of the phenomena that we speak of in your own experience, never mind the frameworks kind of thing. So that was the idea. And from what some of you shared, I think there is the possibility of that, because you are curious about groups and you think about them and you have your own experiences. So we look forward very much to this conversation. And thank you, South Africa TA Association, for inviting us. It's quite special to be invited by colleagues from another primary discipline, but a different one, and yet in the same wider space. So we're very grateful for that. Yeah. I'll share screen and proceed. Yeah. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So beneath the surface is what we titled it, and we would want to focus today on particularly looking at what happens when we are in groups, and how does the thinking within the discipline of group relations try and make sense of that, our experiences in groups. Yeah. So I'd like to begin by saying a little bit about what is this lens called the group relations lens. What are the main ideas or main influences, so to say. Group relations, the framework has been around for a while. The late 1940s, it's a post-World War II phenomenon where there was a lot of thinking about, groups and institutions and the relevance of institutions and how does one make them more effective. So the group relations framework actually draws on very many disciplines, one of the central ones being psychoanalysis, and therefore the place of the unconscious in our work is quite central. Then work on socio-technical systems, on systems thinking, many influences of sociology, anthropology, organization behavior. These are some of the significant disciplines where we believe there has been a lot of inspiration and very direct influence in what we call, and as Diane pointed out, maybe what has also shifted over time in how group relations understands itself. Like I was saying, post the World War II, there was a lot of concern, particularly in Europe, in the UK, about how does one understand leadership and how does one rebuild society. This approach, again, as Diane pointed out, is called the Tavistock approach. That's what it's referred to quite popularly, for the reason that the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in the UK did a lot of pioneering work. Some of the very, I think, brilliant thinkers on group relations actually worked at the institute, at the Tavistock Institute, and offered the first group relations conferences. The Tavistock Institute remains a place where I think they recently said that they from, I think, 51, which is when the first conference was offered, they've not had a year where it was not offered. they managed even in COVID times. So that's something that they, I think, see themselves as people who are, important to the work. But group relations work did spread to many countries. And in India, we've had group relations thinking and work from the early 70s. It's one of the countries very early on that group relations work came to. One of our mentors, Gaurango Chattopadhyay, attended the conferences in the Tavistock and others in the UK. And he found that this way of thinking and understanding groups quite impacted him in a very significant way. He's retired, he's quite old now. He used to teach at the Institute of Management in Kolkata in India. And that institute offered group relations work for a very, very long time, as long as he worked there. So India, the US, where it's called the A.K. Rice Institute, and many other institutes in the US. I think in South Africa, it's I think the university in South Africa offers group relations work. At least there are some colleagues there. And a lot of places in Europe, Israel, as I said, Australia has been a place where they have had a rich tradition of group relations practice and thinking. Even academic courses are offered in Australia. The central aspects of what we would call, if we say what's the most core and what's most defining about group relations, I would say the lens of the three things. One is the lens of the unconscious. So when we look at things, we're always thinking about, so what are the unconscious dynamics here? It is a clear lens, without any doubt. But the lens is the unconscious. The focus is on the group or system. The focus, while the individual is taken into consideration, the real focus of group relations work is the group or system. And the quest or the hope is that the work, the thinking, the puzzling about, the practice, experience will lead to a greater understanding of what does leadership in groups mean? What is involved in the exercise of leadership, and how does that help systems to then flourish? So it is always a question that group relations is interested in. In fact, the very early conferences used to have actually a very standard title, which was called Leadership Authority Organization. It was something like the Holy Trinity or something of group relations. But authority relations, as in, how does one experience authority unconsciously, the psychoanalysis piece, leadership as I would say, the quest, and organizations or groups as the focus. That's primarily what group relations work is about. I'd like to speak a little about the place of the unconscious, because it's, like I said, very, very central to how we see everything. And the idea of the unconscious, particularly in Western psychology, was quite a transformative idea when it was articulated. Many, many different branches of psychoanalysis have developed it. There are differences in the way they see things, but the idea of the unconscious essentially helps us to make some more sense, perhaps, or get a handle in some ways on many things that puzzle us about ourselves, about others, and about systems. So I particularly said articulated in Western psychology by Freud and others subsequently, but I think it's, for us in India, it's very important to note that the idea of the unconscious has been articulated very, very, very many more centuries, in fact, millennia back. It's very much part of the, Hindu, Buddhist philosophies. There's a lot of work done on the mind, for instance, in Buddhist thinking. And while it may not be called and defined so aligned to, say, what Freud and Jung and Lacan and many others have subsequently worked on, but the idea that a lot of our behavior, a lot of what we do, comes from a place which we are not aware of, and for a certain reason is in a place that we can't easily access, is a very familiar and idea to early Indian philosophy. But there is no question that Freud and people further have, through psychoanalysis, made the idea of the unconscious quite, I think, popular today. I mean, there's very few people who would say, I've never heard of that. I mean, they would, in some senses, some way, have heard of it, although they may not have thought very much about it. But it has become quite a popular idea. So by its very nature, unconscious material is outside our awareness and pushed in there because of the difficult feelings that they evoked in our early experiences. So yes, but why are we so concerned about it? Why is it so central to us? Simply because we believe that a lot of what we think, do, decide, act, and behave today is influenced in a very large way by unconscious material. And therefore, in that sense, it is useful to try and be curious about it or get to know or puzzle about it, simply because of the huge role that the unconscious plays in our everyday, in our current situation. It is particularly visible, we think, the unconscious, when it comes to habitual patterns. When we get sort of almost inevitably pulled into a particular kind of response. There is a sense of a repetitive way of doing things or a repetitive response, which very quickly comes to us. And that's very often a cue as to the fact that maybe there is something here which is not quite what the situation called for, but much more that it comes from something which comes from somewhere else, and not necessarily because of the particular realities of the situation we are currently in. For instance, why we instantly like or dislike people it's something to be thought about. We don't know anything about them, so why do we either like and hate? And that's very it's very quick. So these kind of situations and these kind of responses help us to think that there is something more happening here, and there's a larger influence, which is called the unconscious process. And therefore, this lens of the unconscious, we believe, is quite valuable. The second, which when I said that the focus of group relations is on groups, why should we learn about groups? I think some of you already responded to that in your in the invitation that we gave you as to what drew you here. The fact that we don't always find it easy to be in groups. It has its rewards, it is valuable, but not always something that we can make sense of. And therefore, it is useful actually to learn about groups. Bion, who was one of the pioneer thinkers about unconscious processes in groups, he was a psychoanalyst himself, and one of the most original thinkers in the field of group relations. Beyond said that he had a lovely quote which said that man, something like man is a creature who's both in love and hates his groupishness. We need groups. We are creatures of groups. We are social creatures, but we are forever ambivalent about being in groups. But there is no point in time when we are not in a group, whether we might be in a physical group or we are in a group in our mind. For instance, we are always members of our families or some sort of social group. It may not be a group that you're physically with in a room at the moment, but it is a group role that you hold and influences many of the things that you do. So if you try and think of situations, there's almost no situation where you can safely say that I'm not a group creature at this point in time. You're always in groups and in multiple groups at the same time. Therefore, it's useful to understand a little more about groups and why they do what they do, and how one can understand what we are up to in groups when we are in groups. But also because groups, we believe it's useful because group relations work also helps us to think a little more about very large groups. For instance, organizations, so large groups, very large groups, even large systems, big institutions, and society. Society is a large group. When society in your neighborhood and in your country, in your state, in the world. So there are many ways in which individual behavior does not helps us only to an extent, and there's something about groups and how they function and what might influence them that might help us some more. And the group relations practitioners find this work valuable for this reason. Like some of you said, we have ambivalent feelings about groups. Even a group that we are in sometimes is a group that suddenly puzzles us. We think we know this group, and I think I do understand my family or my neighborhood, and then I find that, or my organization, or a subgroup within the organization, and then there may be at times when I feel at odds with that very same group. I don't get it. I don't get why the group behaves or why I feel the way I do, etc. So there is nothing like, you know a group and then it's known to you, and then there is a steady feeling of comfort. It can change, and therefore the learning about groups is a continuous and constant process, and learning about ourselves in groups is a continuing and constant process. Much as we would like to, getting a group to work effectively is not a simple matter. Cecil talked about team coaching, and many of you are, organization consultants, or you belong to organizational groups. It actually doesn't matter whether the group is small or large, what its task is. Is it a very basic task? Is it straightforward, or is it something really complex? It actually doesn't seem to matter. If you think about groups you're in, you will see that no matter what the size, no matter what the nature, no matter what the task, it is not easy to have a group working effectively. It requires quite a lot of skill and a lot of work to get a group to work in the way that it is meant to. But very little actual attention is given to that, and people assume and hope that groups will work well. But it actually isn't necessarily something that one can rely on or take for granted. So the question that we ask often as people who practice group relations work is, how do you know if the group is really working, in the sense of what do you look for, what do you pay attention to, both inside yourself and in terms of what the group is up to. When you have this question about, which is a very basic question, it's a very natural question, is this group working well? But what would you look for? And would you think about looking inside yourself to know if the group is working well as looking at others and the group as a whole to know how the group is working? For us, these are, for group relations practitioners, these are very critical questions. What are you looking for, really? And the central question for us always is also, what is the role of unconscious processes as the work of the group proceeds? How do those come into play, and what happens as a result? The third aspect of group relations that I talked about, I'd like to say something about it in relation to groups, which is groups and leadership. Beyond said that every group, however casual, meets to do something. And that's the very definition of a group in group relations. For instance, we wouldn't actually, like if there's a beach and there are people on the beach, I mean, everyone's doing their own thing, you wouldn't call that a group. Because individually they're there to do something, but they're not there as a group to do something. So in group relations framework, that's not a group. But say someone walks into the water and it's rough and someone's drowning, and then a set of people get together to save that person. They become a group because they've gotten together to do something. So however short term that may be, or long term, or however complex the task, the central aspect that defines a group is what has it got together to do. And the to do is the most important way in which the group is identified as a group. It's what the term that we would use in group relations work is its task. What is the task of this group is one of the most important defining aspects, the identifier. Everything else about that group would follow from its task. Members of the group, all of them, whoever is in that group, for whatever reason, but they are there. Each of them, each of us, if we are in a group, has a role and a contribution to get the group to do the something that it is meant to do. But very often, you might like to think about your own memberships of different groups, and you may find that in some groups, you do make a contribution, you do play a role, which you're very conscious of, and you want to do that, and you have thoughts and feelings about it, and you might even be actually quite pleased with what you are doing in that group. And there may be other groups where you are a member, but for some reason, which may be conscious or not conscious, you don't make the kind of contribution that you maybe potentially could. And why is that? Again, group relations work believes that this is something very important to think about. What is the potential for our role and contribution, and what do we end up doing, and why? So the why is always the big question. And the group relations lens will always say, yes, there is a conscious response to the why, but there's the unconscious reason why that why is also happening. And that's perhaps quite interesting and quite important to think about. So in the group relations framework, the definition of leadership is actually quite simple, and maybe sometimes a little different from how we define leadership in maybe a lot of management literature. I don't know how you all see it in transactional analysis, and maybe that's something we could talk about. But in the GR framework, leadership is very, very sharply defined. It's all about enabling people working in a group setting to attend to the group's task and to accomplish that task in the best possible manner. So the central idea in leadership is attending to task. And task is why the group was set up. So all acts of leadership are about how does one enable attending to task in a way that is useful, helpful, hopefully joyful also, kind of thing. So we distinguish between leader, which is about individuals and individual traits, which is what, for instance, a lot of management literature would and thinking would talk about, you know, the qualities of the leader, the characteristics of a leader. Instead, we focus on the act of leadership, which any group member can exercise. It isn't about a designated or a single person who's a leader, but the process of leadership is what is focused on. And we believe that this leadership that is defined in this way involves both an ability to pay attention to what we call the inner life, the unconscious processes of members in a group, and how does that show up in the group, and what does the task need. So anyone who's exercising leadership would have to be interested in these aspects and pay attention to it and focus on it. That would be a necessary competence or even skill of someone in leadership. So those two questions, which is the first is the group clear about and is it achieving what it set out to do? And second, how do individual members' here and now emotional states impact what the group as a whole ends up doing? And what does the group do to the emotional states of its members? Both sides of that question are of interest to us. I'd like to say something about the first question. It seems like a rather obvious one. You know, does the group know what it is supposed to do? But I think, you know, it's quite interesting that very often groups are not clear about what they are supposed to do or what they set out to do. Different members of the group may have very different ideas about what this group is supposed to do. The group may have agreed that it has a certain idea about what it sets out to do, but what it does is very different from what it sets out to do. So there is many possibilities over here in terms of a group and its task. And there is absolutely no guarantee, I would say, actually, that any group is actually very clear about what its actual task is. Clear in an inner sense of the group be clear. There may be something written on a piece of paper or something like that, but is that really the task that individuals are committed to work on? Is that why they joined this group? Are there other aspects which are both conscious and unconscious that end up influencing why this group even came together? These are questions that can be thought about right from families to large institutions. The Supreme. I mean, it's a question I often ask today about the Supreme Court of India or the Indian Parliament. Isn't clear about what it's supposed to do because it ends up doing a lot of things that it should not be doing. And organizations. I was once consulting to a network of organizations in a very drought-prone district, which is not very far from Bangalore, where I live. And these organizations, big and small, were working with ways in which most of Indian agriculture is rain fed, and there's not much of other organized ways of irrigation, etc. So in a very in a district where there's very little rain, it's very difficult for agriculture to be sustainable, and they end up being very poor districts. So we had this set of organizations, both big and small, and they had set up a network. And then this network was funded by an agency, an aid agency. And after some years, in fact, the network was, in a sense, set up by the agency as well, because the common factor with all those organizations is that that agency funded the work of all those organizations, some very large and, having people who were very well known, and some really very small. And then they just fought and fought and fought. So there was a point at which one of them sought some external consultancy. And I recall, I would travel about 400 kilometers to go and spend a day and a half with them. And the only question that I believed was important to ask is, why were they a network? I mean, what was their task? And it seemed like an impossible question. I mean, they would say everything but talk about this. And by the sixth meeting, I was very patient. I did this 400 kilometers back and forth 7 times over a period of about 7 or 8 months. And they finally actually discovered that they did not have an agreed on primary task to be a network. They were hoping, some of them thought it's better to stick around together. Maybe, we will get funds or something else. And then they discovered slowly that everyone had a very different idea of why they were a network. And perhaps the most important things that they could do together as a network, they were not actually ready to do. And then it was quite actually shocking to me and sad, but they decided to disband. And the only reason they disbanded is because they realized, after these long 6 meetings in which nobody would speak to the point, that actually they did not have a primary task. They did not have a core task. And maybe that was a relief, that they didn't have to actually pretend to be a network which wasn't a network. So this idea that groups are clear about their task and work to it is perhaps very often a bit of a fantasy. And a lot of work in organization development is about helping groups and people or systems to see whether they have a common idea about their task. And then the second, which is the conscious and unconscious individual positions and of the group as a whole, which I will talk about a little more, which also impact how the task is understood, how it is taken up, who ends up doing what and why. That's it. I'd like to just pause here for a few minutes and see whether there's something that you want to say, or a response, or even a question or a disagreement. I may not be able to see each of you, so you just have to unmute yourself and speak, because I can only see a few of you on the, or shall I just stop share? Maybe I'll do that. Yeah. Go ahead, Margaret. Yeah.
The story you've just shared with us, Rosemary, made me think. I mean, I'm a transactional analyst, so I think in TA. So, and it just brought to mind the TA theory around discounting, and what Julie Hay gave us was something called Steps to Success. And in that process, I find it so incredibly valuable, because it's a process of getting the group or the individual within the group to look at what they are discounting and at what level. And I was thinking how with your story that the reason you mentioned they'd need to do the things they'd need to do, they were not willing to do. So when they realized that, they stopped what they were doing. And the process that you go on in the steps to success is to look at, is there a problem? What is the problem? Which is what you're talking about, and recognizing it is significant. We don't have a goal here. We don't know what we're supposed to be even doing. Do we want to do it? Can we do it? Do we have the skills? But then the bigger part, and for me, organizationally, the bigger part of the process becomes the next stage, which is, yes, we want to change it or do it. We have the skills, but we don't have a strategy. And there's this tendency to rush out and do things with no strategy, which is then sabotaging. So unconsciously still sabotaging. It's a way to sabotage the process. And then the last step in the model is success. Do you actually want to succeed? So there's possible unconscious fear of success that will make you sabotage that. And I did one that I used the model once with someone in a TA 101, and it was a wonderful process where we went step by step. He wanted to start a business. He had done everything. Everything was in place. So every step we got to the level of success. I asked him, is that where you may be stuck? And he went, oh, and he said, I've been working on the wrong issue. My problem is not that I can't start the business. My problem is that I'm afraid of success. And that's what he then needed to go away and do the work on.
Yeah.
So just brought that to mind. Recognizing the unconscious, where you're stuck unconsciously.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Margaret, that's very helpful. It's quite common. It's quite we encounter this quite a bit, even in ourselves, but very much in systems and groups. Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask? There's never a group size like a nation. I mean, because it feels like very occasionally a nation is trying to do maybe at an Olympic sport event or something. Everyone is trying to encourage, but it feels like a nation is all over. Certainly, South Africa is all over the place. But would it be considered a group at points?
If we look at the idea of a system, it is a system.
Mm.
So it's a very, 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 very large group, which is what a system is. But if it's very fascinating, to think about what is the primary task of the nation.
Obviously multiple groups with multiple other tasks within that bigger.
Yeah. And, like in our nation today, there are such contradictions in what. So the constitution of a nation is supposed to be its guiding light, for instance, or whatever is the forming document, supposed to be the guiding light. But if that fails, or people don't really believe it, or have different ideas of nationhood, I mean, that nationhood identity, what is the primary task, is a you're right when you say that it's a fairly complex group to try and get a handle on. But if one realizes it is a system, then one can, I think, see that this is actually what's happening. There are very different ideas about the primary task of this nation. And no wonder that, yeah. Sure,
so
go
even
ahead.
in politics, you would get some people's belief that their role is to serve the nation, and others is, in South Africa, how much money can I make out of the system?
Yeah,
so you've got those different views of the purpose of
absolutely,
service as well, which is a problem.
And to recognize it, you see, we are not one of I think what I've always liked about group relations is it encourages you to look at what is the reality of this situation at this point in time. It's not about making a big judgment at this point in time. is to say, well, this is what's happening, and to face that first as the first step. Then what do I want to do? Do I want to be in this group or not? Are secondary issues. They come later. Cecil, you wanted to say something?
Rosemary, I love the lens of group relations that you offer us, and particularly your definition of leadership. And you speak to two things, particularly the role of leadership. I also like it that you say it's not the leader, but leadership belongs to the system. And you said two things: task, and certainly in corporate spaces or collective spaces, organizational spaces where we do most of our work, people spend 95 to 98% of their time focusing on tasks. Maybe not so much the bigger overarching purpose that they're serving, but definitely a focus on what needs to be done. And on the other side, the second part, how do members' emotional states impact the group and vice versa? In the emotional state, and also I want to suggest perhaps a third part, which you haven't explicitly excluded, is the emotional state of that group as a relationship system. The emotional field, as it were, the interconnection, the collective, the kind of connective tissue between the people, that's also a focus for leadership, is to nurture the connective tissue. And that very often is in the unconscious and needs to be brought to the conscious and worked with at that level. Does that make sense?
Totally. The next few slides are about that. Yes, totally. Yes. The group as a whole, and what is that thing when we say group as a whole, and what happens to people, and what is that tissue, as you called it, the connective tissue? How does it function as a whole? That's a very big part of the task. Yeah. Ravia.
Rosemary, I was just reflecting that for all of us, the first experience of a group is the family group. And I'm thinking about what you've shared about the task and members' emotional state and impact, and whether that original first group experience impacts really those two. What is the task in a family group? And is it forever ongoing? Does it really end? And then with regards to the emotional states and our unconscious patterns, aren't they related to that first ever experience? I mean, I'm just thinking, that's what was in my mind when you were talking. I was just thinking about the family, the original group we've all experienced.
Yeah. Would you want to take a guess at what do you think the primary task of a family system is? How would you describe it?
For me comes development, personal development, growth. These are the things that come to mind, It's raising generations.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's the nurturance, the development. One group relations practitioner called Ed Shapiro is based in the US. He's written a beautiful book on the citizenship role of families. I never thought of it like that till I read his work. And he talks about the fact that actually families are the basic unit that help society to develop and produce, so to say. Sounds like a mechanistic process, but to produce and to have mature citizens, people in society. It's an important role of a family, but nurturance. And if we look at it, and you're absolutely right that so much, almost all, if one worked with what Freud and Jung and others said, I mean, almost all unconscious material is kind of because of the first early years from infancy to about age 3 or something. And then we end up actually repeating that, reinforcing those patterns. And they are, for instance, the primary material of authority relations. How do I forever see authority figures in my life has so much to do with my early experiences of authority figures. And, whether I'm the boss or I have a boss, or how I relate to peers, colleagues, the work that Byrne and many others have done in relational TA on scripts, for instance, is very closely linked to, what is your stance vis-a-vis the world, and therefore what roles and stances do you take in every system that you're part of, in every group that you're part of. And, you raise such an important point, because at one level, we say, yes, of course, that's the role of the family system, to nurture and to develop. But when we see ourselves in families, we sometimes knock that primary task out. It becomes a secondary or tertiary task. The primary task becomes, what about the status of this family, and are you doing the right thing, and what about honor, and what about tradition, and what about something else? And sometimes that becomes so big, or money, or the family property, or something like that. And actually the task of nurturance and development of various members of the family, because everyone has a developmental stage. What happens when people are older? They have a different development need. So the job of the family system is to pay attention to the development needs of its members at whatever stage they are. But that tends to take a back seat, and we forget that that's the primary task, and other things come to the fore, and then we have unhappy experiences in families, which are quite common. So the myth of happy family is more a myth than a reality, I think, sometimes.
This is reminding me of transaction analysis when we did drivers, Marguerite, about you can have be strong driver in your family. So it becomes about everyone having to be strong or be perfect or be quick. Those can become like the predominant thing that the family has to do and be about. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted there.
Yeah. No, that's so things like that. So these are a huge unconscious influence, not just on the family system, but on all systems that we are in, because we import unconsciously these messages. And I think it might be similar in South Africa, but we have a lot of family businesses, for instance, in India. It's very complex when it's a family business. Some of our largest conglomerates are family businesses. And, so what happens to who gets onto the board and who will be the CEO next, and, where does merit lie, and, complex questions. Because if the model of the family is imported into the business, it might work. I mean, many of them are very successful, but it has its own complications. And the point I think that Gunjan and I will make repeatedly is not whether something is right or perfect, because nothing is ever perfect. But that, do we recognize the dynamic? Do we note it? Do we acknowledge it? And then do we find a way to work with it or work around it if there is that desire? That's the point, really. It's not that, you should not have a family business, but when you do you see what is happening? And when you don't have a family business, you can still have people's ideas or hopes about their own families coming into their professional spaces. So, you forever searching for a big brother or something like that. And you're very annoyed that your colleagues are not big brothering you, and can be a problem. So, okay, let me proceed. I always have this idea that there's a lot of time, and then I find there's a lot more
Just
that we want to say. Yeah.
I
Okay.
just wanted to flag that we are all an
Yeah.
hour to the session. Yes.
Yeah. Though I think actually the discussions at this stage much nicer than later. Okay, so I'll move to the point that Cecil was raising, and which is a central idea in group relations, which is the group as a whole. Which is we basically say that if one is paying very careful and curious attention to groups, then we can see that groups don't act just like a group of individuals. There's something about groups where the group seems to have its own culture or own personality of sorts. I'm simplifying it. But the group has a way of also exhibiting some unconscious processes. Bion was the first who noted this and articulated it in a very clear way. He said that in all groups at all points, without exception, it is as if at any point in time there are two groups that exist at the same time. He called one the work group, and he called the other the basic assumption group. So he said that at any point in a group, it's almost as if there are two groups there. And these are not two physical groups. It's not like John, Grace, and Jim are in one group, and then, Gunjan, Cecil, and Rose are in another. It's not like that. It's two simultaneous ideas floating around of groupishness. Okay. They are, in a sense, another way to explain it is two mentalities that exist at the same time. And then beyond having noted groups very carefully said that, while they coexist, either the work group is dominant or the basic assumption. In group relations work, we call it BA, basic assumption. And this keeps shifting. There would be times that a work group is the dominant, visible group. You can see the group functioning like a work group. And at other times, it functions with the basic assumption being more dominant. So this shift can be rapid. You can have a group in work group mode for a reasonable time and then collapse into basic assumption, or seeming in a basic assumption mentality or mode for a long, long time. It's very difficult to say when they move. I'll talk briefly about each of these. What is the work group? The work group is the group we always fantasize is the group we have and the group that exists and should exist. It's the group mentality where the members are working consciously on the agreed on task. So, we are a group that works on leadership and development in such and such organization. We are the department. When members are working on the task of leadership and development for that organization, it is in work group mode, because that's the supposed task, that's the agreed task, and they're actually working on it. So a work group would be purposeful, it would be productive, it would be focused on its task, it would cooperate out of will. Cooperation is not out of chance, but out of will, conscious cooperation. An important aspect of a work group is that it can recognize and deal with distractions. So when something sweeps the group away or threatens to sweep the group away, a group that is in work group mode will notice that. And notice that, hey, this is pulling us away from our task. That's not what we're supposed to do. And will bring itself back to task. So that attention to distraction or diversions or conflict, the attention to that is work group mode. So if there is a conflict and the group papers over it, the group refuses to acknowledge it, then it's not in work group mode, because it is pretending consciously or unconsciously not wanting to face the conflict or the diversion. Yeah. A work group has the other quality of being structured to support the task. So, our work groups have organization structure or a group structure which is helpful for task. Not always the case, sometimes we have committees that have some 6 vice presidents or 7 secretaries or something, and everybody has to be given a role because you have to keep somebody happy or whatever. It may not necessarily support the task. So when a group is structuring itself to support the task, it's in work group mentality. Another very interesting aspect of a work group is it has a sense of time. So if this group, if most of its members, all of its members are aware that, okay, there are 2 hours, we started at such and such, we've done 1 hour, we're halfway down the presentation, then we say, okay, that's the task. And we have a sense of time. But if we are not a work group, then we may get carried away and stuck on one point for 45 minutes. And we've lost sense of time. So that's an important, again, characteristic. A work group also is oriented outward towards its context and realities. A work group is not a group that's only caught up with itself. It recognizes that it's in a context and it spends time looking at what is the context now, what is the shift in context, and what does that tell us about how we need to maybe either configure ourselves differently or change strategy, as Margaret was saying, that sometimes it's the lack of strategy that freaks a group out. So seeks knowledge, learns from experience, allows questions. Again, important qualities, characteristics. So these are pieces of evidence that you can use, you can search for to check whether the group you're in is a work group or not. In the Indian culture, asking questions is considered very often disrespectful. So someone, who asks a question will be seen as a young Turk kind of person, troublemaker. Whereas the question might have been very important for the group to draw attention to some reality which it needs to look at. And finally, leadership in the work group is focused towards the task. And the group members feel that their interest is identified with the group's interest to a reasonable extent. Reasonable extent. Your interests may not be totally identified, but unless you have a reasonable identification with the group's purpose, it's difficult for you to mobilize your member role. Yeah. So many characteristics, all may not be functioning at all points in time, but if many of these function, you can feel reasonably confident that this is a group that is, aware of the fact that it is a work group and is working and developing the skills towards that. I think Cecil was also referring to it, so was Margaret, and that, it's something that doesn't, you can't take it as a given, but it's something that you pay attention to. And when Ravia was talking about, is the task of a family lifelong? Yes, it is. And if the family has to be a work group, which is a group that is focused on its task, then it does lifelong need to be developing these qualities in some senses or putting them to use in order to check whether it has gone off track completely or not. Yeah? So to be a work group requires both effort and skill. It is not something that can be taken for granted. And a lot of work and energy and investment needs to be put into helping groups to be in work group mode or work group mentality. So what is the basic assumption mentality then? Obviously, I will say it as a contrast. What's important to know about basic assumptions is that they are, first and foremost, that they are unconscious. A basic assumption is not a conscious stance. It's an unconscious stance. So to figure it out takes a lot of energy and work. And what happens? Basically, a basic assumption, and that's why they're called basic assumptions, they are shared, tacit, which is unspoken in a sense, tacit, unconscious assumptions, and they emerge from the group's members' wishes, fears, defenses, projections, and anxieties. So what happens when unconscious fears, wishes, anxieties of individuals, when they're in a group, there is a complex and strange and I think beautiful process by which they coalesce in a sense, Cecil, to to become a shared assumption. It's never spoken to. Nobody says, hey, this is our shared assumption. The process is unconscious. That's why we call it tacit. Why did Bjorn choose this word basic assumption? Because when you watch the group at that point in time, the group behaves as if that assumption is what is the truth. It becomes the basic assumption. The task gets knocked out and gets replaced by this assumption, which may be we have to be protected, or the word it's a dangerous place, or only I matter, or whatever that assumption may be. That's the assumption that the group is gripped by at that point in time. And the group behaves as if only that assumption is true. That's when it is in basic assumption mode. So, as you can surmise by now, basic assumption life is oriented inward, and the inward is towards inner fantasy, meaning inner unconscious. And this inner fantasy is often invoked by very primitive feelings, fears, wishes. And when you are in a group or you are observing a group that is functioning in basic assumption mode, it really behaves as if it's out of touch with reality. It really behaves like that. And this is quite common, or in denial or in avoidance. Maybe the denial and avoidance we can recognize more quickly. So the group acts as if the real task is something other than the agreed task. What's fascinating again about basic assumptions is nobody quite owns them. Nobody would actually, no group member will actually say that this is my fear, and I think this is flooding this group, and the group is acting on it and maybe linked up with the fears of all of us in some ways. So they become a very strongly emotive experience, but left in the unconscious. And therefore, it doesn't get tested, it doesn't get challenged. And what is most important is it doesn't get checked for its usefulness for the purpose of the group, for the task of the group. So basic assumptions will continue and will not be spoken to, recognized, or dealt with until a kind of a work group leadership is accessed by somebody, and then they help the group to get out of this basic assumption mode. So, yeah, so I think I will stop at this point and check if there are. Gunjan will now move on to. Gunjan, shall I stop share? And you could then put it up so that, but I'll just pause for a few comments or questions and you could then share. So this is the fundamental idea in group relations, that at any point in time, all groups have a tendency to move between work and basic assumption mentality. And why they move, how long they stay, how long they can access a work group kind of leadership is the question to be thought of. But
Can
yeah,
I ask, if there's suddenly an unprovoked strong emotion of anger or something in a work thing, is that kind of quite often an indicator that there is some basic assumption that's a problem? Because you're saying it's primitive feelings, so
yeah,
somebody almost has an irrational anger or something in a situation would be kind of an indicator that there's an assumption that's a problem, a difference assumption.
That there's that the group may be in the grip of a basic assumption. See, we must remember that basic assumptions are group phenomena. They are not about only an individual and an individual's feelings. The fact that, for instance, the group stays with that or supports that expression of anger would would indicate that this is something that belongs to the group and not just to the individual. That's the distinctive feature, that someone might express it on behalf of the group, but essentially a basic assumption is an assumption that is shared by the group at that point in time and enacted in a particular way. Dan?
I have a question about what would be likely to cause a shift from one assumption to the other. I'm wondering if a challenge from outside to group cohesion might lead to a basic assumption type group mentality emerging, or lack of structure. What would cause one to emerge over the other?
Very often, not necessarily only a challenge from the outside or a structural feature, but just the fact that all of us as members of groups have, our own fears, anxieties, our own desires, wishes, maybe lack of clarity about task. And I go back to what Cecil said, because it's a fascinating and a bit of a mysterious thing. Why does that become so shared, and why does everyone get in the grip of it? But it can be that a new wish or desire comes up, so groups can flit from one kind of basic assumption to another, or they can flit from work group. They were doing a good job, and then they're in the grip of this one or the other kind. There are many kinds of basic assumptions, so one or the other. So it could be that, and sometimes, as you said, Diane, an external event might trigger that, like for instance, threat, or so that can trigger my sense of. But the main thing is that if I don't have a very deep unconscious, or as a group we don't have that sense of insecurity or threat or danger, a lot of interdepartmental rivalries, for instance, within organizations. At a very rational level, you'd say, but we're all in the same organization. We are all working, to whatever, produce this great product or whatever, So why are they so bitter and so, deadly? Some of them, they're generations of leaders, and, forever finance hates marketing, or R&D can't stand production, or something like that. This is because there is certain lack of leadership for task, which helps that group to see that actually it's in the grip of basic assumptions, and that's actually terribly unhelpful. So people have to learn to face kind of not easy parts of ourselves to face, and as a group also to face not easy parts of ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe as Gunjan speaks, we thought we'd take two basic assumptions as an example. There are many more, but two, and she'd speak in more detail about them, and then we could see what a little more of, maybe you'd recognize many more examples. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe putting a time pressure on a group would mean you have to go into the work group mode, because you have to get this job done like within the next week.
It could, or it could lead to madness, stupid behavior. It could be completely bizarre. Groups behave very badly when there's time pressure. They do idiotic things, and sometimes do things that, for instance, risk safety.
And then I suppose businesses are trying to engineer the work, the basic assumption that they want to see. Employing consultants and things to try and work on creating a culture that they want to see, or
unconsciously, you mean?
No, this I suppose would be more that would be more conscious, wouldn't it?
That would be more conscious. Yeah, that would be more conscious. But unconsciously, they may be promoting a certain basic assumption because that sort of works. They may be supporting that, or not exercising their leadership to call it out and do something about it. So that's maybe Ravia. Yeah.
Sorry, very quickly, what you just touched on I'm thinking of discrimination within a group. Is that what falls under basic assumption? And then you said that sometimes it's true or not. Would acknowledging it or denying it make it true or not true? I mean, I'm just thinking about discrimination within a group.
It's a good question. You know what? Let's talk about the two basic assumptions, and we'll come back to your question, because I think it's a lovely question, and we need to think about it. So see whether you recognize it in what Gunjan says. But I think I'll note, and we'll come back to your point, Rabia. It's a lovely question. What is that process? Yeah. Gunjan, you're good to go?
Yep, I'm just going to share screen.
Yeah.
Okay. You're able to...
Gunjan, we can see a lot more. Huh?
No, I will just change it to...
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Ah, okay. All right. Yeah, just give me a minute to put it on slide share.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to start with an example, and I'm continuing from what Rose was talking about. And we're really now looking at different kinds of basic assumptions. Bion postulated 3, and then there were other practitioners of group relations who added a few more. We are just going to talk about 2 today, just so that we get an idea of what happens when a group is in the grip of a basic assumption. And one of the basic assumptions that a group can get caught in is basic assumption dependency, BAD, as it is called. And as I was listening to you, Rose, I was reminded of an organization we were consulting with. And we were working with senior leaders. And yet every senior leader would end up saying something like, oh, but he doesn't want it like that, or he wants it like that, he being the CEO and founder of the organization. It was very surprising for us. How come these are such senior leaders, but they seem to feel quite disempowered and de-skilled, and everything is left up to this leader. And then as we did work with them, we kind of realized, okay, this seems to be a leadership group quite caught in a basic assumption of dependency. Yeah, where everything then is when a group is caught in this basic assumption, it is about looking for safety and comfort from the leader, and group begins to feel like they are completely de-skilled, and they do not have the competency needed to attend to the tasks that they have to do. Yeah? So we were working with the CHRO who said, I want to work with my team and arrive at a vision for the HR function. But, I have already been told by the CEO what has to be the vision. So we're like, if you've already been told, then what is it that you're going to work with your team? Yeah, so in a way, he was saying, okay, let's just take this and just transport it to the team. And of course, the team was saying, we don't believe in this because we haven't arrived at it. Yeah. So a basic assumption dependency, when a group is in this, group looks up to one individual, often to start with the designated leader. And the aim is attaining security and protection. The group behaves as if it is de-skilled and incompetent, and needs a powerful, a godlike leader to rescue it from powerlessness and instruct it towards task completion. And you can probably now begin to think about your experiences in group, where, group, everything is put on to who's the leader designated, or somebody who takes leadership and therefore is seen as a leader. And members cannot find their own competence to attend to the task of the group. In this emotional state, the group de-skills itself, loses the capacity for intellectual work. or understanding complexities, and members behave as if they are simpletons. Like I was saying, these were senior vice presidents of an organization. But they seem to be behaving like they don't know how to run their functions, and only if the CEO or the founder tells them how to run it or which way to run, is that, that's the direction they can take the group into. Of course, the interesting thing about this is that no leader can live up to these impossible demands of providing safety and security to a group at all points in time. And when that happens, the group expresses its disappointment and hostility in a variety of ways. And that's also, I think, our lived experience of being in groups, right? That when somebody tries to take leadership in a group, which is caught in the basic assumption dependency, after a while, they are using the word killed off, but in a way, they won't be heard. People will, revolt against them, not listen to what they're saying, or any voice of rationality, logic, or even somebody saying, hey, there is, time, we are running out of time, we need to do this. And no, we have enough time. So the leadership is really killed. In a way, the leader can be dethroned. Yeah, and another leader appointed. And the hope is that that leader will pander to the need for dependency. And this cycle can go on and on. Yeah, I guess many groups where they're constantly struggling to have a leader, because they're looking for one person to provide, and members really cannot take the responsibility and look at their own skills and what they can offer to the group. And the way this collusion can work is that BAD assumption or lures leaders with a propensity for charisma and control and protectiveness to also then give in to the group, which is what we kind of figured out was happening with this particular group. Yeah, this founder was someone or is someone who had brought this organization to be a unicorn. They were the first unicorn, a $1 billion valuation. So very charismatic leader. So it almost became a collusion between a leader who's very charismatic and then the other leaders, or this leadership group at least, just could not see what its task was, or members to be able to take on their roles in that particular group. So this basic assumption is one of the ones defined by Payan, called the basic assumption dependency. I have experienced that for myself in therapy groups. Maybe some of you run therapy groups, and probably you can relate to the experience of how in a group, very often members will say, oh, but you're the therapist, you're the leader, but you're not telling us anything. You are supposed to provide us the direction. Oh, but this is too structureless. I don't know what we are supposed to do. Okay. Many of these questions then gives one an idea, okay, how come? And this particular group that I'm talking about, I run this group. Many of the participants are psychotherapists themselves. And yet, from time to time, when it gets caught in this grip of basic assumption dependency, looking up to me or the therapist as the leader, that these very capable therapists who from time to time would be working so well with each other suddenly become like, oh, but I don't think I know what to do. Why are we not being told? And in one instance, of course, for a leader or therapist to now be mindful that you can actually quite fall into, get lured into providing that safety and comfort, which can totally derail the task of the group. Yeah. If I think about it, task of the therapy group is really to help people find ways of regulating, find ways of dealing with the complexities and emotions as they emerge. It's not necessary to feel, it's not necessary to just help people feel comforted. Yeah. But when that happens, it's quite possible that a therapy group can end up becoming a support group, where the primary task shifts from development and growth and understanding of deeper structures and change. It just becomes a place where we come together to, feel a bit comforted, bit supported. So that is a basic assumption dependency. Maybe I should just complete the other one also, and then we can stop and look at, your own thoughts and experiences around this. So that's one kind of basic assumption which a group can get caught into. The other one is basic assumption meanness. This probably we all have a very lived experience of, given the times that we are living in. It is where the group members behave as if the group does not exist. The primary task becomes that, as if the group is to be a non-group. Okay? The only reality is the individuals and their respective needs, and only the individuals matter. Each to their own. It's a dog eat dog world kind of a group, and it sustains the myth that there is nothing called a collective. And the culture that is prevalent in a group like this is culture of narcissism. One of the examples of this could be, and which many of us would have experienced, are organizations where, they are these stars, the star performers, right? These larger than life people who can do everything, who can take the organization out, but it's all about the individual. And they never really learn to build the collective or look at the collective. Members act as if the group does not exist. The assumption operating is that the group would be a source of persecutory experiences and will take away all individuality. And I'm going back to what Rose was saying earlier about what Bayon said, that we are constantly at conflict between, being individuals and being members of a group. And when a group is caught in this basic assumption meanness, it really is just all about the individual. I cannot see myself as part of the group. Expressing emotions, building genuine relationships then becomes a casualty, because I really can't see others in the group. They are not my concern. Only me and getting my needs met becomes the concern for me. A basic assumption meanness culture pays far more attention to the private, the individual issues than the public or collective issues. As individuals do not see the relevance of public issues to themselves. They're constantly asking, what's in it for me? And I can so relate to this. For years after I became eligible to vote, I never exercised my franchise to vote. This doesn't work. The system is like this. What's the point of voting? Really not being able to see my own self in the system, and so caught with I, me, myself, that I can't see how I am part of the system, and not exercising my right to vote is then also not doing something about the task of the system. So from something as simple as that, to organizations where each function wants a share of the glory, nobody is interested in collaborating with each other. We find examples of basic assumption meanness in so many places. COVID showed us so much of this basic assumption operating in groups. The queues for getting toilet papers, goods, doesn't matter. If I have food, if I have the toilet paper, that's all is important. And that's when a group because there were such fears operating at that time. So again, going back to basic assumptions, the groups get in the grip of a basic assumption because there are fears and anxieties and hopes and desires, and they are not articulated sometimes. They are not even in awareness. And a group which is caught in this really cannot see the collective at all. Yeah. Rose, anything you want to add before we kind of open it up for questions?
No, Gunjan, I think this is good. Cecil, yeah, Cecil has a
Yeah,
point.
stop share. Cecil, you had a question?
Yes, so I just typed in the chat, most performance management systems in organizations encourage the focus on superstar, high performance, talent, those kind of things. And they elevate the individual and the role they play above the collective.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
So when when there are structural reasons to highlight the individual, then the act of leadership to help the group be a collective and work together becomes a tougher task, because the system is giving also a sort of a nudge towards it's okay to function as a BAME group, BAM group. There's a nudge towards that, though. More consciously. So then we shouldn't be surprised when collaborative behavior is less visible.
Yeah, many organizations we consult with want to move to agile ways of working and self-organized teams, and but the moment you talk about this, that hey, but your performance management system still rewards individual performance and not team performance, then in a way it is very difficult for individuals to, or the group to really think in a different way. So structures can provide legitimacy in some sense for basic assumption groups as well, or they can also be used to then bring about changes to the group mentality. I'm just curious to hear about your own experiences of being in groups, and now saying, okay, have you been in groups where maybe the group at points was in grips of a basic assumption dependency or basic assumption meanness? Yes, Madhu.
Can I share this? A long time ago, I was in the corporate environment, and I was a member of senior leadership. And we had a brilliant consultant come in and do work with us. We had an amazing, progressive-minded CEO who encouraged the consultant, and we embarked on an incredible process of team development with a lot of work on self-revelation, so talking to each other and revealing who we really are to each other, and then feedback, so talking again and revealing how we see each other. And this was a process that had to be undertaken at every level in the company. It was a large national company. And the senior team went through this for years, a number of years. And there was this idea that they were incredibly close, and that we were one, and that we all got it, and we all trusted each other. But after, I think it's about 7 years of this process, something went wrong, and the senior team fell apart abysmally. They betrayed each other, they hurt each other, they destroyed each other, and all left the company. And I met with some of them. I had left before, so I didn't see that part happen, but I met with them afterwards and saw people who were broken by what had happened. But what I'm thinking of as you're speaking is this, that there were two things that you have spoken of. So the basic assumptions, the dependency. Without that CEO, they would not have embarked on this process, and they did it all but watched him all the time. And this me aspect, because my sense was that even though they were going through the motions, they were all watching all the time what is in it for me and how do I pretend to be revealing my innermost self. So they pretended. Some of them didn't, and those were the ones who were most broken because they thought and believed in this cohesion. But for me, it was such an example of, even in that process, so supported by a great CEO, an incredible consultant, things fell apart because of those two basic assumptions never being brought to the surface, never being addressed. But then as he was speaking, I was thinking, but what if we were to agree that it's human? The two basic assumptions are human nature, and stop pretending that we can get rid of them and all be one, and work alongside that in spite of. I'm not sure what one would do with that, because there's something that speaks then to me of something around maybe anarchy and chaos. I'm not sure. But then the danger of the individualism that might then be promoted if we then went, yeah, we're all in it for ourselves. What would happen? I wonder.
You know, what you say is really about working with group relations, right? It's not to deny that these things exist, that you know, I have my fears. There will be envy, there will be competition. To be human in a group, but I think to be able to find ways of bringing it to surface, talking about it, and never trying to kind of get rid of one. What you're saying, right? To learn to live with it side by side, that from time to time it may happen. We will get caught in. I mean, that's how I heard, Margaret, what she was saying, that it's not possible to always just have a group working as a work group. And it's also not there that groups just work as basic assumption groups. There is this constant moving, right?
Yeah.
There is this constant movement happening all the time. And I think the lens allows us then to see as it is moving, shifting, to keep calling it out and working with that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
great. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Am I right? These two aren't mutually exclusive, because you could have a group where there's a dependency, but the leader is in a meanness. In other words, he's part of a the shining stars go to the top mindset, whereas the group is more, okay, we are dependent. Are they mutually exclusive? I'm misunderstanding.
You want to say that something else? You're on mute.
There are more basic assumptions we've just given, and we'll talk about some others, but no, they're not mutually exclusive. It's just that, and there's so many characteristics very similar. Sometimes it's very hard to say, oh, is this group functioning in dependency or is it fight flight? So for us, it's not so important to nail it down so precisely, and they are not at all mutually exclusive. But maybe sometimes some characteristics are so much more visible that you can sort of label it one or the other. But the key issue always is that here is an unconscious process that the group is gripped by, which is shifting it away from its purpose. And like we were just saying in the earlier interaction with Margaret's lovely example, was that all of us like to be in well-functioning groups. We're not wicked, evil people generally. we're caught in the grip of things. It's very human. And we get sucked by a group phenomena, to which we may have a certain predilection, a certain balance, a certain. So in that case, it's even harder to notice it. So to actually be very kind to ourselves and to the groups we're in, because it's. And I think, I mean, Rabia was saying that her name means storyteller. And I thought that was so fascinating, because I was just thinking that most stories, we read as children, they say, and they lived happily ever after. So there's this fantasy that, you reach some point and then that's it. It's stable and nothing is going to spoil this. But life's not like that. Stuff happens, and, being human is a constant work in progress. And it's not like those graphs in companies or even in NGOs where you reach perfection, and then that's why we get very disappointed when something was going well, and then we are so surprised that something happens. But if the lens is of unconscious processes, then we say, yeah, that's how it is. We progress and we go back and we get stuck and we try again. Yeah.
I'm just going to share the remaining basic assumption groups, and then also just maybe the concluding slide, and then whatever time we have left, we can look at any other question. So Bayon, like I was saying, postulated 3, basic assumption dependency, basic assumption fight-flight, where the group gets caught, the basic assumption being as if either we have to be in fight or flight mode, and basic assumption pairing. Then Pierre Turquet postulated basic assumption oneness, and Gordon Lawrence, basic assumption meanness, which we shared with you. And Gauranga Chattopadhyay, who's been the mentor for all of us in India with group relations work, postulated the basic assumption purity pollution. But we didn't want to go through all of these, also because of the time, but just so that you have an idea that a group can get caught in different kinds of basic assumptions. From moment to moment, it could shift. Not so moment to moment, but it can shift. And it is also shifting between work group and basic assumption mentality. And just to conclude, I think what it has done for me personally really is shifting this lens about what does it mean to be therefore part of a group. One's willingness to exercise leadership that allows the group to notice its basic assumption mentalities and move towards work group mentalities so that it can work to the task of the group. Really, what is the task of this group? And if whatever we do, all our leadership is really exercised in that direction, and helping the group constantly look at what could be, notice its basic assumption mentalities. It helps us to see the group's unconscious at work through individuals. Of course, there is, we see individuals, and individuals are saying some things or behaving in a certain manner, and that gives us an idea of what might be happening at the level of the group. And what it does is that it not load all conscious and unconscious dynamics onto individuals and make it an individual's problem. And I think that is really, really valuable in this way of thinking about groups, that when we hear something from an individual or we see them doing something, to really ask this question, what does it also represent for the group? Yes, it means something for the individual, but what is it representing for the group? And what is it saying about the group's unconscious processes? So in that sense, the GR framework operates from a place of compassion for individuals. That to kind of not personalize things, and really to look at what is happening and how it is also something on the behalf of the group. And yes, that all of us, no matter who, are subject to the pull of the unconscious. Okay, I'm just going to stop share. And yeah, any
I have about 6 minutes. Yeah.
any reflections on what this has meant?
Thank you. I found that really fascinating presentation, and it was a good reminder of lots of important things. I liked the examples that you gave, and also Marguerite brought in, that I thought were very interesting. And obviously the value of this is patent, in the sense that the unconscious is always so active and important in all workings, and at the same time a little subtext, I suppose, is that I have sometimes seen groups struggle too long and too hard to contain a particular individual's pathological behavior, on the grounds that it was supposed to be, that the group, it was reflecting the unconscious of the group and so on. And I think there are occasionally times where one particular person is sufficiently damaging to a group that the group needs protection from them. And I've seen this in organizations quite often. So I just want to add that as well.
It's a good point, Dan, because it's not one or the other. It's a very important point, and I'd actually like to very quickly link it up with what Ravia was saying, which is the other side of what you noted. How does one understand, for instance, very blatant discrimination? And it could be, it could be many things that are happening. It could be that nobody calls it out because the group is in a dependency, basic assumption, or fight flight, or could be anything, or oneness, that you can't question, because it's so terrifying that we are sort of something together will be broken. So those are situations where a lot of what is happening doesn't get spoken to, doesn't get worked with. And so is someone whose behavior is very destructive, they may have a lot of reasons why they are behaving that way, and it's very destructive to the group. There's always a thing about how does this group work with that, and what parts of it is it able to find the leadership to deal with, So the working through and finding ways to work through and recognize, and with different ways is what leadership is all about. Not just a calling out, or not just a this is terrible. That's not working. That's just observation. But to work and find ways of being together without necessarily sorting everything out. So discrimination, I think, remains hidden. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I think Vijaya dropped out. She said she was traveling.
I find this webinar really interesting, and I feel like we've only explored the tip of the iceberg. There's so much there that we can discuss. But the thought I'm left with is, like what I said, the first experience of a group and how much that experience impacts our later experience of other groups, and what patterns emerge in this group because of that first experience. And if, like, every person can go back to that first experience, understand it, heal it, how much better we would be in other groups, you know, and maybe all these patterns that come up will not be in those organizations. It's a bit of a dreamy fantasy of mine.
Yeah, that's what I think Rose was referring to, that we do have that fantasy of happily ever after. We do
Yes.
hope things will be always,
Yes.
nice and resolved. And yes.
Thank you very much, both. It was really interesting to be here.
I suppose that how you define the basic assumption would give you a path out, would provide a kind of a map for the way forward. So it would be interesting to look at ways to navigate once you have a predominant basic assumption in future, I think. I don't know. Interesting.
Yes, in this one, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Just, gratitude to both you, Rosemary and Gunjan, for the presentation. So I do work in the space of team coaching, and I appreciate this additional lens through which to almost view some of the, I don't want to call them dysfunctions because it sounds indicting, but when things don't work, this provides an additional lens to ask oneself, what might be getting in the way of this team's effectiveness or this group's effectiveness? So I appreciate that additional lens, and I look forward to Googling the other basic assumptions we didn't get to, because I would appreciate understanding how do they show up, how are they defined as part of then building a vocabulary for understanding this space. So thank you to you both. It was genuinely informative. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we are on time.
Yeah, we're on time. We'll try and send you some material. There's some lovely, very seminal articles. You might enjoy them. So
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to take the opportunity to end off with huge gratitude to both of you for being here. I think we all got a lot out of this, and I'm actually wondering if you would consider coming back and sharing the rest of the basic assumptions with us. So perhaps we talk about that. But at least if not, if you send those articles you've just mentioned, that would be fantastic, because I found this quite inspirational and interesting, and I think we all have. So thank you both for coming on and being with the South African TA Association in this wonderful space today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank
Bye.
you. And love to Bangalore.
Thank you.